Some betrayals come softly like a whisper. Others walk down the aisle in a white dress. The message appeared on my phone. Saint Mary's Church. 2 p.m. You need to see this. An unknown number. My husband Chance was supposed to be in Chicago for a business trip, but as I sat in my car across from the church watching guests arrive, I saw the impossible Chance standing at the altar, waiting for his bride. And then she appeared. Faith, my best friend. The vows began. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just an affair, this was a second marriage. I left without a word, but silence was never my style. The text message glowed in the darkness of my car. St. Mary's Church, 2 p.m. You need to see this. Unknown number. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, watching guests filter into the old stone building through my rain-streaked windshield. I'm Hope, sitting in my car like some amateur private investigator, wondering if I've finally lost my mind. My husband Chance told me he had a business conference in Chicago. That's what the calendar said. That's what his secretary confirmed. That's what the hotel reservation showed. But here I am, parked across from a church in Boston because some stranger decided to play guardian angel or devil. I'm not sure which yet. This is insane, I whispered to myself. But despite the doubt, my hand reaches for my sunglasses. The church bells begin their mournful toll, pulling me from my thoughts. I step out of the car, my heels clicking against the wet pavement. Each step feels heavier, like I'm walking toward my own execution. I slip in through the side door, finding a spot behind a marble pillar. The familiar scent of lilies and incense hits me, and for a brief moment, I'm transported back to my own wedding day, 7 years ago, same church, different dreams. The organ begins to play and my heart stops. There he is, Chance. My Chance. Standing at the altar in a tuxedo I've never seen before. His hands clasped in front of him, that nervous tick in his jaw. He's not in Chicago. He's here, waiting for the bride. She appears at the entrance, and the ground shifts beneath my feet. Long dark hair, olive skin, that merciful walk I know it anywhere. Faith. My best friend since 3rd grade, the woman who helped me pick out my own wedding dress. Dearly beloved. The priest's words fade into white noise as I watch them exchange vows. My husband and my best friend, promising to love each other until death do them part, just like he promised me. Just like we all promised each other when we were kids. No secrets, no lies, friends forever. I don't remember leaving the church, don't remember the drive home. But I remember the moment I decided, sitting in our perfect magazine-worthy kitchen that Chance insisted on remodeling last year. I watched the sun set through windows that suddenly felt like prison bars. My phone buzzes. Chance. Conference running late. Don't wait up. I pour myself a glass of his favorite scotch, the one he saves for special occasions. The liquid burns my throat as I swallow, and I welcome the pain. It's real, unlike everything else in my life. Another text from the unknown number. Now you know. What will you do about it? What will I do? I laugh, and it sounds foreign to me, sharp, dangerous, like breaking glass. I open my laptop and start typing. Dear Laura, I hope this email finds you well. I've been thinking about hosting that family reunion you've always wanted. Because that's the thing about betrayal. It's not just about the act itself. It's about the elaborate dance of lies that came before it, the carefully constructed alibis, the practiced smiles, the casual touches that meant nothing. And Chance, my charming, perfect Chance, has always been an excellent dancer. But so have I. I take another sip of scotch and smile. Let them have their honeymoon. Let them think they've won. I've got time, and I've got something better than their love. I've got their trust. The sun sets completely, leaving me in darkness. But for the first time today, I can see everything clearly. The old photo album feels heavy in my lap, each page weighted with memories I can't trust anymore. There we are, Chance, Faith, and me at 16, sprawled on my parents' lawn. Chance's arm is around both of us, and we're laughing at some forgotten joke. The edges of the photograph are worn, like everything else about that summer. I ordered Chinese. Chance calls from downstairs, his footsteps echoing through our house, each one making my skin crawl. He's been home 3 days since the wedding, his second wedding, acting like nothing's changed, like he didn't just shatter everything we built. I close the album as he enters our bedroom, carrying 2 plates of food I won't touch. Remember when we used to get takeout with Faith every Friday? The words leave my mouth before I can stop them, sharp as broken glass. Chance's smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. That was a lifetime ago, was it? I stand up, letting the album fall to the floor with a satisfying thud. Because I saw her 3 days ago. She looked exactly the same. His chopsticks freeze halfway to his mouth. Just for a second. Blink and you'd miss it, but I catch it. I catch everything now. Hope. He sets his plate down, approaching me with that concerned expression he uses on difficult clients. Have you been drinking? I laugh, and it sounds like my mother's laugh after Dad left. That's your move. Gaslight the wife into thinking she's crazy. I'm worried about you. His hand reaches for mine. I step back. When did it start? The question burns my throat. Was it before our wedding? During? Tell me, Chance. Was I the backup plan or the cover story? You're not making any sense. But his left hand twitches, his tell when he's lying. I've spent 7 years cataloging his habits, learning his rhythms. Funny how clearly you see things when you're looking for the cracks. I was at St. Mary's on Tuesday. The words hang between us like smoke. Nice tux, by the way. Better than the one you wore at our wedding. The mask slips just for a moment, but it's enough. His eyes go cold, calculating. This is the real Chance, the one I never let myself see. It's not what you think. Don't, my voice doesn't shake. I'm proud of that. Don't insult me with excuses. I watched you marry my best friend while I was supposedly your loving wife at home. What exactly should I think? He runs his hands through his hair, another tell. It's complicated. There are things you don't understand. Like what? The joint bank accounts you opened? The property you bought together? Or maybe the fact that your mother knew the whole time? That stops him. How did you... I'm not the idiot you think I am. I move to the dresser, pull out the stack of documents I've collected over the past 3 days. You should really use better passwords than our anniversary date, though I guess that's meaningless now. Hope, please. He reaches for the papers. I hold them back. We can work this out. I'll explain everything. Like you explained your business trip to Chicago? I spread the documents on the bed. Bank statements, property deeds, emails. Or should we discuss the trust fund Laura set up for your children with Faith? His face goes white. You had no right. I had every right. The scream tears from my throat, raw and primal. I'm your wife. I was your friend. We grew up together, all 3 of us. And you? I stop, breathing hard. He's staring at me like he's never seen me before. Maybe he hasn't. Maybe I've never seen myself either. Get out! My voice is steady now, certain. This is my house too. Not anymore? I hold up one final document. Power of attorney, signed last year, when he was too busy to handle our estate planning. You should really read what you sign, Chance. Now get out before I call Justice and have him escort you out. He leaves, not because he's afraid, but because he knows this is just the beginning. He knows me well enough for that. I pick up the photo album from the floor, trace our younger faces with my finger. We look so happy, so innocent, such perfect liars. All of us. The cafe where Faith and I used to share secrets feels smaller now. Maybe it's the weight of what I'm about to do, or maybe everything from my past is shrinking, becoming less significant with each new betrayal I uncover. Faith slides into the seat across from me, still wearing her wedding ring, my wedding ring's twin. The sight of it makes my coffee taste like acid. I didn't think you'd come, she says, fingers nervously tracing the rim of her untouched latte. Funny, I didn't think you'd marry my husband. The words come out softer than intended, which somehow makes them cut deeper. She flinches. Eleanor? Did you know about the trust fund? I pull out the bank statements, sliding them across the table like playing cards in a rigged game, the one Laura set up for future children. Her face drains of color, not from guilt, from anger. Interesting. What trust fund? Now that's genuine surprise. I watch her scan the documents, her hands shaking slightly. 3 million, I continue. Set aside for the grandchildren Laura always wanted. Guess I wasn't producing them fast enough. This can't be right. Faith pushes the papers away like they're contaminated. Chance said the marriage was just a formality for his inheritance. He said, I laugh, and it sounds like breaking glass. What exactly did he say, Faith? That he loved you? That I was cold, distant, career-obsessed? That's what he told his mother about me last month. She looks up sharply. How do you know that? Because I've spent the last week discovering just how thoroughly my husband, our husband, has been playing us both. The waiter approaches. We both wave him away without looking up. There's more, I continue, pulling out my phone. Want to hear the recording of Chance discussing property investments with Laura, the ones using your family's real estate connections? My family's? Faith's voice trails off. Her mother, Mercy, owns one of the largest real estate firms in Boston, a detail Chance knew well before he ever asked me out. Did you ever wonder why he chose us? The question hangs between us like smoke, the two best friends who'd never betray each other, the perfect cover story. Stop. Faith stands up so quickly her chair scrapes against the floor. You're trying to hurt me because I hurt you. I get it. I deserve it. But sit down. My voice doesn't waver. You haven't heard the best part yet. She sits, more from shock at my tone than obedience. Remember that summer internship Chance helped you get at Mercy's firm? The one that convinced your mother he was such a wonderful guy? I slide one more document across the table. Look at the date on that property transfer. Her hands shake as she reads. This is my mother's signature, but she would never sell her prime investment property for half its value. She didn't know she did. Check the witness signatures. Faith's face crumples as she recognizes her own handwriting. I was just notarizing documents. Chance said it was practice for my license. While I was planning our wedding, you were unknowingly helping him steal from your own mother. The truth tastes bitter on my tongue. He played us both, Faith. The only difference is I figured it out before he could take everything. She looks up at me, really looks at me for the first time since she sat down. What are you going to do? I stand up, gathering the documents. Wrong question. The real question is, what are we going to do? We? You have two choices. Keep playing his game and lose everything or help me take him down. I pull out one final document, a USB drive containing everything I've discovered, your mother's company, my savings, Laura's reputation. He's built his entire plan on the assumption that we'd never compare notes. Faith stares at the drive like it might bite her. If this gets out, everything burns. I place my hand over hers, feeling the wedding ring that matches mine. But this time, we'll be the ones holding the matches. She closes her fingers around the drive, and I catch a glimpse of the friend I used to know, fierce, loyal, unstoppable when crossed. When do we start? She asks. I smile, and for the first time in weeks, it feels real. 3 empty wine bottles already mock me from the kitchen counter, not my usual poison, but tonight isn't usual. The documents from Chance's office are spread across our dining room table, our wedding gift from Laura, like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. My phone lights up. Another message from Chance. Please, let's talk about this rationally. Rational. Like the way he systematically built this house of lies. Like the calculated precision with which he chose his marks. The phone buzzes again, this time from Faith. Mercy is asking questions. We need to move faster. I switch it off, but my hands won't stop shaking. The gravity of what we're planning finally sinks in. This isn't just about exposing Chance anymore. We're talking about destroying families, reputations, lives. The doorbell rings. For a moment, I consider ignoring it, but then I hear the key in the lock. Only one person besides Chance has that key. Jesus, Eli. Justice steps into the dining room, his eyes scanning the chaos. When's the last time you slept? I wave vaguely at the papers. Did you know Chance's father killed himself? Justice freezes. What? 10 years ago, right after Chance graduated law school. I hold up the newspaper clipping I found buried in Laura's financial records. Officially, it was a hunting accident. Unofficially, I push forward a stack of bank statements. He discovered Laura and Chance had been embezzling from his company for years. Christ. Justice sinks into a chair, his face going pale. Does anyone else know? Just the person who's been sending me anonymous tips. I tap the burner phone on the table. They sent me this today, copies of William Mitchell's suicide note. He tried to stop them, Justice. He tried to expose them, and they... My voice cracks. Eli, Justice reaches for my hand, but I pull away. I'm becoming them. The words taste like ash. All these plans for revenge, for justice, I'm turning into exactly what I hate. No, you're not. Justice's voice is firm. You're protecting people, Mercy's company, your future, Faith's. Am I? I stand up, pacing. Or am I just so focused on destroying Chance that I don't care who gets caught in the crossfire? Because right now, I'm sitting here planning to expose everything at the family reunion, knowing it'll devastate people who had nothing to do with this, like who? Justice interrupts. Like Chance's sister's kids, who'll lose their college fund when I expose Laura's financial schemes. Like Mercy's employees, who might lose their jobs if the company's reputation tanks. I grab one of the wine bottles, not caring that it's empty. Like William Mitchell, who died trying to do the right thing, while I'm plotting elaborate revenge scenarios like some comic book villain. Justice is silent for a long moment. Then he stands up and takes the bottle from my hand. You want to know the difference between you and them? I look away, but he continues. You're standing here at 3 a.m., torturing yourself about the moral implications of your actions. They're sleeping peacefully, counting their money, and planning their next con. That doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't. He starts gathering the papers, organizing them methodically. But it means you have a choice. You can expose everything dramatically at the reunion, like you planned, or ... Or what? Or we do this the right way, legally, carefully. He holds up William Mitchell's suicide note. We finish what Chance's father started, but we do it smart. We protect the innocent parties first. The burner phone buzzes. Another message from the anonymous source. Ask Laura about the offshore accounts. I stare at the message, then at the chaos spread across my dining room table. 7 years of marriage, a lifetime of friendship, generations of lies, all leading to this moment. Okay, I say finally. Show me how to do this right. Justice nods, pulling out his phone. First, we need to talk to someone who specializes in financial fraud. I know a guy. Wait. I grab his arm. Before we do this, I need to know something. Are you helping me because I'm right, or just because I'm your sister? He meets my eyes steadily. Both, and neither. I'm helping you because someone needs to stop them, and you're strong enough to do it without becoming them. I look at the empty wine bottles, the scattered papers, the evidence of my near descent into their world of manipulation and revenge. Maybe he's right. Maybe there's a better way to burn it all down. Justice's lawyer friend keeps talking, but I'm fixated on the single sheet of paper in front of me. A list of names, children mostly, beneficiaries of trusts that would collapse if we moved forward with our plan. The offshore accounts are just the beginning. James Harrison says spreading more documents across his mahogany desk. Laura Mitchell's financial web extends through at least 3 generations of both families. How many people would be affected? My voice sounds distant even to myself. Directly around 30, indirectly he shrugs. We're talking about dismantling a decades-long scheme. The ripple effects could impact hundreds. Justice leans forward, but we can prove the fraud easily. The question is whether we should. James taps the list of names. Some of these trust funds are supporting medical care and education. Stop. I stand up abruptly, moving to the window. Boston spreads out below, oblivious to the bomb we're about to detonate. There has to be another way. My phone buzzes. Faith Mercy found the missing property documents. She's calling Laura today. We're running out of time. Justice says, reading over my shoulder. If Mercy confronts Laura directly, everything falls apart anyway. I turned back to James. How long would it take to secure protection for the innocent parties? Weeks, maybe months we'd need. The office door bursts open. Laura Mitchell stands there, immaculate as always, but her eyes are wild. I should have known you'd run to justice. How did you? James starts. My daughter works in your building. James, did Hope tell you that part? How many families she's willing to destroy for her revenge? That's rich coming from you. Justice stands, moving between us. Laura ignores him, focusing on me. You think you're protecting people? William thought the same thing. Look where that got him. The room goes silent. Even the city noise seems to fade. What did you just say? My hands gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white. Oh, didn't your anonymous friend tell you everything? Laura's smile is razor sharp. William didn't just discover our schemes, he tried to fix them. Root funds to protect the beneficiaries, just like you're planning, and you stopped him. The pieces click into place. The hunting accident was exactly that, an accident. But her eyes shift away. The point is, Eleanor, some structures can't be dismantled without destroying everything they support. You're not just fighting chance or me, you're fighting generations of carefully balanced arrangements built on lies and theft, built on necessity. Laura moves closer. Did Chance tell you why he married you? Your family's political connections, 3 generations of judges and prosecutors, the perfect shield. My phone buzzes again. Mercy's name appears on the screen. Take the call, Laura says softly. Listen to Mercy discover what her daughter's been hiding, watch another family shatter. Or she pulls out an envelope we can discuss. Alternatives, Eli, don't. Justice starts. What alternatives? My voice is steady, but my heart hammers against my ribs. A clean break, generous settlement, the innocent parties stay protected. Laura sets the envelope on James' desk. Everyone wins, everyone except Justice. Justice snaps. Justice. Laura laughs. Ask Eleanor what she really wants. Justice or peace. My phone keeps buzzing. Faith's messages, join Mercy's calls. The list of names stares up at me from the desk. Children, families, futures. How long do I have to decide? The words taste like surrender until Mercy finishes reading those documents. Laura moves to the door. Choose wisely, Eleanor. Unlike William, you still have a choice. She leaves, and the office feels both larger and more suffocating. You can't seriously be considering this, Justice says. I pick up the list of names, then my still buzzing phone. What if she's right? What if trying to fix this just makes everything worse? That's fear talking, not justice. Maybe I look at James, but what if fear is trying to tell us something important? The phone buzzes one final time, then falls silent. Whatever Mercy discovered, it's too late to stop it now. I pick up Laura's envelope, feeling the weight of decisions not yet made. I need to talk to Faith, I say finally, before we decide anything else. Because sometimes I'm learning, revenge isn't about who you're willing to hurt, but who you're willing to save. The Mitchell family estate looms before me, its windows glowing like warning beacons in the dusk. Cars line the circular driveway, all the players assembled for what they think is a surprise anniversary party for Laura and her second husband, last chance to back out. Justice stands beside me, holding the briefcase containing everything, every document, every recording, every piece of evidence we've gathered. Eli, they're already inside. Faith appears at my other shoulder, her voice tight. Mercy is with them. Chance is watching the door like a hawk. I adjust my black dress funeral appropriate, though they don't know that yet. Did you secure the exits? James has people stationed at every door. Justice checks his watch. Once you start, no one leaves until everything's exposed. The weight of Laura's envelope presses against my ribs, tucked into my dress. Her offer of silence of protection for the innocent still unopened, still a possibility. We enter through the kitchen where caterers bustle around unaware they're serving the last supper of the Mitchell dynasty. Chance spots me immediately, his face flickering between relief and suspicion. Eleanor, he moves toward me, champagne glass in hand. I didn't think you'd come and miss Laura's party. My smile feels like broken glass wouldn't dream of it. His eyes dart to the briefcase, to Faith, to Justice. I see the moment he realizes something's wrong. But Laura's voice cuts through the murmur of conversation. Everyone please gather in the main hall. The crowd shifts, carrying us with it. I catch glimpses of familiar faces. Mercy, pale but composed. Laura's second husband, oblivious and beaming. Chance's sister, clutching her children's hands, the children. God, the children. Laura raises her glass. Thank you all for coming to actually. I step forward, my voice carrying across the sudden quiet. I'd like to say something first. Chance moves toward me, but Justice blocks his path. Faith positions herself near Mercy. Eleanor. Laura warns, think carefully about what you're doing. I pull out the envelope she gave me, still sealed. I have thought about it for weeks. I've thought about nothing else. I turned to address the room about justice and protection, about who deserves the truth and who deserves mercy. Eli Chance's voice holds real fear now. Whatever you think you know, I know everything. I open the briefcase, but I don't remove the documents, not yet, about William's death, about the trust funds, about your 2 marriages, and Laura's schemes, and every lie you've told to keep this house of cards standing. The room erupts in whispers. Mercy steps forward, her face ashing. Faith. I'm sorry. Mom. Faith's voice breaks. I didn't know, not until Eleanor showed me. Showed you what Chance's sister demands? What's going on? I look at the children, their confused faces, their innocent futures hanging on my next words. Laura's envelope burns against my skin. The truth, I say softly, is that I came here tonight to destroy everything, to expose decades of fraud and manipulation, to get justice for everyone who's been hurt by the Mitchell family's lies. I pull out the first document, William's real suicide note. Laura goes very still, but standing here looking at all of you, I meet Chance's eyes. I realize there's something worse than being deceived, something worse than being betrayed. Eleanor. Justice warns, but I continue. It's becoming the very thing you're fighting against. I strike a match. When did I take it from my purse and touch it to Laura's envelope? The paper catches quickly and I drop it into the briefcase. No. Justice lunges forward, but it's too late. The evidence burns, years of careful investigation turning to ash with it, burns my chance at justice, at revenge, at everything I thought I wanted. The fire alarm shrieks, sprinklers activate, people rush for the exits, pushing past James's guards in the chaos through the smoke and spray. I meet Laura's eyes. She knows what I've done, chosen mercy over justice, chosen to protect the innocent over punishing the guilty. But her triumphant smile fades as I pull out my phone and press send, because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's redemption. The police lights paint Laura's pristine kitchen in alternating red and blue. She sits across from me at the marble island, both of us dripping from the sprinklers, watching officers cart away boxes of evidence, the real evidence, not the decoy files. I burned copies, I say quietly. Everything in that briefcase, just copies. The originals went to the FBI an hour ago. Her perfectly manicured nails drum against her coffee cup. You chose this moment deliberately, the party, the family gathering, like father, like daughter-in-law. I slide William's actual suicide note across the counter. He planned to expose everything at your anniversary party too, didn't he? Before the hunting accident, the drumming stops. Through the window I see Chance being led to a police car, Justice watching with grim satisfaction. You don't understand what you've done. Lord. Laura's voice trembles. Those trust funds are being protected. I pull out my phone, show her the court orders. Every innocent beneficiary has been legally separated from the fraudulent accounts. The children will keep their college funds. The medical care continues for the first time. I see real fear in her eyes, how I had 3 weeks after you offered me that envelope, 3 weeks where you thought you'd won. I lean forward. Did you really think I spent that time doing nothing? A commotion at the door draws our attention. Mercy enters, flanked by federal agents, her eyes lock with Laura's. You killed him? Mercy says flatly. You killed William. When he tried to protect my daughter from your schemes, Laura stands so quickly, her chair topples. That's ridiculous. William was going to expose how you used Faith to access Mercy's company records. I interrupt how you manipulated Chance into marrying us both to maintain your financial facade. Everything I did was for this family. No. Faith appears in the doorway, tear-stained but steady. Everything you did was for yourself, and now we all know why. I slide one final document across the counter, an old photograph. Laura goes very still. William wasn't just trying to expose the fraud, was he? I watch her face crumple. He discovered something else about Chance's real father, about why you needed the Carter family's connection so desperately. Mom, Chance calls from outside. Mom, what's happening? Laura lunges for the photograph, but Mercy is faster. Her gasp echoes in the suddenly silent kitchen. That's my father with Laura 37 years ago. I confirm 9 months before Chance was born. The truth hangs between us like smoke. Decades of manipulation, all to hide one desperate affair to maintain the Mitchell family's perfect image. You destroyed everything, Laura whispers, just like William tried to. No, I stand, gathering the remaining documents. You destroyed everything the moment you chose lies over love. William tried to save us, all of us, and now, finally, he has. What do you mean? She looks at me, confused, but I pull out my phone one last time and show her the message chain from an unknown number, scheduled emails from a dead man. William knew he might not survive trying to expose the truth, so he left breadcrumbs for whoever was brave enough to follow them. I meet her eyes. I wasn't your first victim, Laura, but I will be your last. The officers approach to escort her out. Through the window, I see Chance, watching, understanding finally dawning on his face as Mercy shows him the photograph. Was it worth it, Laura? She asks as they lead her away, burning everything to save a dead man's honor. I think of the children upstairs. Their futures are now secure, free from the manipulation that once held them captive. Faith and Mercy, finally free. William, who died trying to protect us all. Some things, I whisper softly to myself, are worth burning for. The sun rises over the Mitchell estate, painting everything in gold. The sirens fade, and beside me, Justice squeezes my shoulder. You okay? I watch as Laura disappears into a police car. 30 years of secrets crumble in her wake. No, I answer honestly, but I will be, because sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just shows you who you really are. The last box from Chance's study sits unopened on my kitchen counter. Through the window, autumn leaves scatter across my backyard, where 3 kids once promised to be friends forever. My phone buzzes. Faith. Mercy wants to meet both of us. The trial ended yesterday. Laura and Chance both guilty. The headlines called it justice. The society pages called it scandal. Neither quite captured the truth. I lift the lid from the box, expecting more evidence, more secrets. Instead, I find an old video camera, the kind we used that summer before college when everything seemed possible. The doorbell rings and I open the door to find Faith standing there, looking smaller somehow. More like the girl I used to know than the woman who helped unravel everything. I found mine too, she says, holding up an identical camera. In Mom's attic. She places it on the counter, the relic of who we used to be. Neither of us reaches to turn them on. Did you read Chance's statement? She asks. No. I pour us both coffee. A habit from before, when friendship was simple. Did you? She presses. He said he loved us both. Her laugh sounds brittle. Actually believed it. I think for a moment. That's Chance, living his own truth, even when it's a lie. The afternoon light catches the cameras, casting twin shadows across the kitchen. Faith touches one gently. We should watch them, she says, her voice soft. Before Mercy arrives. Before we decide what happens next. She nods, and we both know Mercy's meeting isn't just about reconciliation. It's about the future of her company, about trust and second chances, about whether some bridges can be rebuilt after they've been burned. I connect the first camera to my laptop. The screen flickers to life, revealing us young, laughing, whole. Chance behind the camera, narrating our last summer together before college, before choices, before we learned how love and lies could wear the same face. Stop, Faith says suddenly. Look at that. The frame freezes on our younger selves, sharing some forgotten joke, but it's Chance's reflection in the window that catches my eye, the way he watches us both. Even then he was planning. He didn't destroy us. I realize he just showed us who we already were. What do you mean? I ask quietly. You always wanted adventure. I always needed control. He just weaponized those truths. Faith's coffee goes cold, untouched. Now the second camera sits dark and unwatched. Some truths, I'm learning, don't need to be seen to be understood. Now we choose, I say. Not between right and wrong, between easy and true. The doorbell rings again. Mercy. Before Faith can move to answer, she grips my hand. I'm sorry, she whispers. Not for loving him, for forgetting how to love you first. I squeeze back, remembering Laura's final words at the trial. Love makes liars of us all. Maybe, I tell Faith, we stop trying to fix the past. Maybe we just build something new. She nods, understanding what I'm not saying about Mercy's company, about second chances, about how sometimes revenge isn't about destroying what was, but creating what could be. I open the door to Mercy, noting how she carries herself now straighter, stronger, free from decades of manipulation. The autumn wind scatters more leaves across the yard. Somewhere in a prison cell, Laura plots her appeals. In another city, Chance writes letters that will never be read. Life moves forward, messy and imperfect. I leave the cameras on the counter untouched. Some memories don't need revisiting. Some truths are better lived than remembered. Mercy spreads papers across my kitchen table, plans for rebuilding, for moving forward. Faith and I exchange glances, remembering other papers, other plans, other choices. Ready? Mercy asks. I think of William, setting truth bombs to detonate years after his death. I think of Laura, building walls to protect secrets that were never worth keeping. I think of Chance, loving so desperately he forgot how to love honestly. Yes, I say, and mean it. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting free. Justice or revenge, are they really so different? When betrayal is exposed, do you burn everything down yourself or simply step back and let them destroy each other? Hope didn't need to strike the final blow. She only had to do one thing: let the truth speak for itself. And when the truth emerged, those who built their lives on lies crumbled under their own weight. Chance, the man who always believed he was untouchable, felt the walls closing in. Business partners started asking questions. Deals that once seemed secure slipped through his fingers. The perfect deception was no longer holding together, and the cracks were growing wider by the day. Faith, who had staked everything on Chance's love, now faced a devastating reality: she was never the only one. The relationship she had sacrificed so much for was nothing more than another piece in his carefully constructed game. She wasn't the winner. She was just another pawn. And Laura? The woman who had orchestrated so much from behind the scenes finally felt the consequences of her own manipulations. Financial investigations uncovered shady investments, a well-timed call to Mercy, a few emails to the right authorities, and the empire Laura had built on deception began to collapse. But the cruelest punishment wasn't watching them lose everything. It was letting them live in fear, knowing that at any moment, the next revelation could come and shatter what little remained of their worlds. So, if you were Hope, what would you do? Would you let them destroy themselves, or would you take the final shot? Comment below and share your thoughts. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.
Life has a funny way of mixing the sweet with the bitter. That's how I describe my current life situation. I'm Kelsey, 28 years old, newly married to Braxton, the kind of man who makes my everyday brighter. We live in a small house, a charming place really, left to me by my grandfather. It's our little haven filled with love and the dreams of a future family. Braxton and I were saving up, hoping to buy a bigger house someday. But for now, this place is our world. It's quaint, filled with memories of my childhood and now of our life together. Then there's Braxton's family. His parents, Jerry and Bonnie, are decent folks. Jerry's a bit stern, the kind who believes in hard work and responsibility. Bonnie, she's a sweetheart, always trying to smooth things over whenever there's a disagreement. But the real challenge in the family dynamic, that'd be Macy, Braxton's younger sister. She's 25, living a life starkly different from ours. She doesn't work, spending her days hanging out with friends and living life at her own pace. Family dinners are often an interesting affair. Like this one Sunday, we were all gathered around the table at our house. Jerry was in his usual form, lecturing Macy about getting a job. "Macy, you're 25. It's high time you started thinking about your future," Jerry said sternly, barely looking up from his plate. Macy just scoffed. "Oh, come on, Dad, I'm doing just fine. Why rush life?" It was the usual script. Bonnie, ever the mediator, jumped in to defend her. "Jerry, leave her be. She's still figuring things out." Jerry's disapproval was palpable, but he let the topic drop. This was a recurring theme, Jerry trying to push Macy towards independence and Bonnie cushioning her fall every time. It's a tightrope walk in their household. Macy's relationship with work, or the lack thereof, wasn't just a topic at the dinner table, it was a family concern. And yet, there was this unsaid rule not to push too hard, not to upset the delicate balance. Braxton and I, we try to stay out of it. We've got our own plans, our own future to build, but sometimes family issues have a way of spilling over, don't they? After that Sunday dinner, things started to change, slowly at first, then all at once. Macy began dropping by our house more often. Initially, it was just the odd visit here and there, but soon it became a regular thing. Almost every other day she'd show up, sometimes even when Braxton and I weren't home. I remember one afternoon I was in the middle of baking when I heard the front door open. In walked Macy as if she owned the place. "Hey, Kelsey," she greeted cheerfully, sauntering into the kitchen. "Smells good in here. What are you making?" I forced a smile. "Just some banana bread, for dessert tonight." Macy didn't seem to get the hint. She plopped down at the kitchen table, watching me cook. "I'll stick around for a bit if that's okay," she said. It wasn't, not really, but what was I supposed to say? "Sure, Macy, make yourself at home," I replied. The visits became more intrusive. Macy would help herself to food in the fridge, lounge on the sofa for hours, sometimes even borrow my clothes without asking. I tried to brush it off, told myself she was just being friendly in her own way. But one day, I reached my limit. I walked into the living room to find Macy sprawled on the couch, flipping through a photo album, one of our wedding albums. "Macy," I couldn't hide my irritation. "That's private. Can't you ask before going through our things?" She looked up, seemingly unfazed. "Oh, relax, Kelsey. We're practically sisters. What's mine is yours and what's yours is mine, right?" I sighed, trying to keep my composure. "That's not really how it works, Macy. There should be some boundaries, She just shrugged and went back to the album. I felt this wave of frustration, but I swallowed it down. No use arguing. Braxton noticed the tension too. One evening after Macy had left, he found me sitting on the couch, lost in thought. "What's up, Em?" he asked, sitting down beside me. I looked at him, the words spilling out. "It's Macy. She's here all the time, going through our stuff. It's like we don't have any privacy anymore." Braxton frowned. "I know, I've noticed. I'll talk to her, okay? She probably doesn't realize she's overstepping." I nodded, though I wasn't sure talking would help. Macy had this way of just brushing off any criticism, laughing it away like it was nothing. True to his word, Braxton spoke to Macy a few days later. I wasn't there for the conversation, but he told me about it afterward. He said he'd been gentle but firm, explaining that while she was always welcome, she needed to respect our space and privacy. She took it well, Braxton assured me. Said she didn't realize she was being a bother. She'll back off. I wanted to believe him, but there was a part of me that doubted things would change. And as it turned out, I was right. The visits continued, and with them, the tension grew. It was like walking on eggshells in my own home, never knowing when Macy would pop up next. The situation with Macy escalated quicker than I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those rare days when I had the house to myself. Or so I thought. I was upstairs tidying up the guest room when I heard a noise from our bedroom. My first thought was Braxton had come home early, but a peek down the hall confirmed my worst suspicion. It was Macy. There she was, in our bedroom, rummaging through my dresser. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and disbelief as I watched her casually pull out my clothes, examining them as if she was in a store. "Macy, what the heck are you doing?" My voice was louder than I intended, echoing off the walls. She jumped, clearly not expecting to get caught. "Oh, Kelsey, it's just you. I was looking for something to wear tonight. You won't mind, right?" "Mind? Of course I'm against it, Macy. This is not okay. You can't just go through my things like this. It's invasive and disrespectful." She rolled her eyes, a move that infuriated me further. "Calm down, Kelsey. It's not a big deal. I just wanted to borrow a dress." I felt my patience snap. "It is a big deal, Macy. This is my home, my privacy. You can't just barge in and take whatever you like." Her attitude was dismissive, almost mocking. "Geez, Kelsey, you're acting like I'm a thief or something. I'm just borrowing." I was about to respond when my phone rang. It was Braxton. Taking a deep breath to calm my nerves, I answered, trying to sound normal. "Hey, Braxton, what's up?" "Hey, Kelsey, just checking in. How's your day going?" I glanced at Macy, who was still standing there, a defiant look on her face. "Not great, actually. We need to talk when you get home." After hanging up, I turned back to Macy. "You need to leave now, and don't take anything with you." She huffed, dropping the dress back into the drawer. "Fine, whatever. You're making a big deal out of nothing," as she stomped out of the room. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. This was more than just borrowing a dress. It was a total disregard for boundaries, and I knew it couldn't go on. That evening, when Braxton came home, we had a long talk. I told him everything, not just about today, but about how Macy's behavior had been affecting me for weeks. Braxton looked troubled. "I'm sorry, Kelsey. I thought talking to her would help. I didn't realize how bad it was. We need to do something, Braxton. It's not just about the clothes or the food. It's about respect and privacy. She's crossing the line, and it's not fair to us." Braxton nodded, his expression serious. "I'll talk to her again. I'll make it clear that she can't do this. If she doesn't listen, we'll have to limit her visits." Despite Braxton's efforts to set things straight with Macy, our problems were far from over. In fact, they got worse. It started with small things, a missing pair of earrings, a scarf I couldn't find anywhere. At first I thought I was just being forgetful, but then the evidence became too obvious to ignore. One evening I was scrolling through social media when I saw a new post from Macy. There she was, grinning at the camera, wearing my missing scarf. My heart sank. It wasn't just forgetfulness. Macy was taking my things. "Braxton, come look at this," I called out, holding up my phone. When he walked into the room, he leaned over, looking at the screen. "Isn't that your scarf?" "Yes, it is," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "She took it, Braxton. She's been taking my things." Braxton's face hardened. "I'll talk to her. This is crossing the line." The next day, Braxton confronted Macy. I wasn't there, but he told me about it later. He said he was direct, showed her the photo, and asked about the scarf. Macy's response was as infuriating as it was predictable. "Oh, that scarf? I must have grabbed it by mistake. I have one just like it." Braxton didn't buy it. "Macy, it's not just the scarf. Kelsey's noticed other things missing too. This needs to stop." Macy shrugged, all innocence. "I don't know what she's talking about. I haven't taken anything." It was a stalemate. Braxton believed me, but Macy was in complete denial. What could we do? We had no proof, just a strong suspicion. The situation put a strain on our home life. I felt violated, unsafe. Even my own home didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. Every time I left a room, I wondered if something else would be missing when I returned. It wasn't long before another incident occurred. This time, it was a pair of sunglasses. I knew I had left them on the kitchen counter, but they were gone the next morning. And as if on cue, Macy showed up later that day wearing a pair identical to mine. "Nice sunglasses," I commented, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Macy looked at me, a smirk playing on her lips. "Thanks, got them a while back. Pretty cool, right?" I didn't respond. What was the point? It was clear she wasn't going to admit to anything. Braxton was as frustrated as I was. "I don't know what else we can do, Kelsey. If she won't admit it, how can we stop her?" I didn't have an answer. We were stuck in this cycle of theft and denial, and it was wearing me down. I started hiding my valuables, locking doors I never used to lock. It felt ridiculous, but I didn't know what else to do. The thefts were bad enough, but what happened one Friday night took everything to a whole new level. Braxton and I were curled up on the couch watching a movie, trying to forget our troubles for a while. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m., when we heard a commotion outside. Loud voices, laughter, the sound of a car door slamming. My heart sank as I peeked out the window. There in our driveway was Macy, looking tipsy with a group of her friends. They stumbled towards the door, and before we could react, they barged in. Macy was leading the pack, a drunken grin on her face. "Surprise!" she slurred, as her friends filed in behind her, loud and unruly. Braxton stood up, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "Macy, what the hell? It's almost midnight." Macy just giggled, swaying slightly. "Chill, bro. We just wanted to hang out, have some fun." Her friends were already making themselves at home, one of them heading to the fridge, another cranking up the music on their phone. I felt a surge of frustration. This was not okay. "Macy, you can't just show up like this, especially not this late." Macy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, come on, Kelsey. Loosen up a bit. We're just having a little fun." Braxton's patience snapped. He marched over to the group at the fridge. "No, Macy, you need to leave. Now. This is our home, and you're disrespecting it." One of Macy's friends, a tall guy with a loud laugh, piped up, "Hey man, no need to be a buzzkill. We're just partying a bit." Braxton was seething. "I don't care. Get out, or I'm calling the police." The atmosphere shifted from rowdy to tense. Macy looked at Braxton, her expression sobering a bit. "You wouldn't call the cops on your own sister, would you, Braxton?" Braxton didn't waver. "Trust me, this is the last straw, Macy." There was a moment of standoff, then Macy sighed dramatically. "Fine, we're leaving. You're such a killjoy, Braxton." As they filed out, the relief was palpable. Braxton locked the door behind them and turned to me, his face a mixture of anger and worry. "I'm sorry, Kelsey. I had no idea she would do something like this." I just nodded, feeling emotionally drained. "It's not your fault, Braxton, but this can't go on. She's out of control." The incident at our home was a wake-up call. We knew we couldn't let Macy's behavior slide anymore. But before we could figure out what to do next, something unexpected happened. My dad, a police officer, decided to visit us for a few days. He had always been my rock, and I was grateful for his presence, especially now. He arrived on a Thursday, his old duffel bag in hand, and a reassuring smile on his face. Hey, pumpkin," he greeted me, giving me a firm hug. "Thought I'd drop by and spend some time with my favorite daughter." I smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "I'm your only daughter, Dad, but I'm glad you're here." The only unpleasant moment is Macy, who ran in for a minute, asking to go to the toilet. After a moment's thought, I let her into the house, not wanting to make a scandal in front of Dad. Dad was a man of few words, but his presence alone made me feel safer. He had a way of bringing calm to any storm. That evening we had a quiet dinner, and I could tell Braxton felt more at ease too. The next morning, things took a turn. Dad usually kept his wallet and a few personal items in a small pouch he carried, but when he went to grab his wallet, his brow furrowed in confusion. "That's odd," he muttered, searching through his pouch. "I could have sworn I had my card in here." Braxton and I exchanged a look. "What's wrong, Dad?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my stomach. "My bank card. It's missing," he said, sounding more puzzled than worried. We immediately called the bank and blocked the card. Just then, my phone rang. It was Macy, her voice loud and slurred, the sound of music and chatter in the background. "Kelsey, why the hell did you block the card? I can't withdraw any money." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about, Macy? The card?" Macy interrupted. Kelsey, the one I took from your room. I was using it to buy drinks and now it's blocked. I felt a mix of anger and shock. Macy, that wasn't my card. It was my dad's. He's a police officer, for God's sake. There was a pause, then a nervous laugh from Macy. You're joking, right? That's not funny, Kelsey. Dad, she took your card, I said, turning to my father, who was now listening intently. He took the phone from me. Macy, this is Officer Mitchell. You need to return my card immediately, or there will be consequences. There was a moment of silence, then the line went dead. Dad looked at us, his expression grave. I'll have to report this. It's a serious matter. Braxton put his hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Dad. We had no idea she would do something like this, I said. Dad just nodded, his face stern. I'll handle it from here. Don't worry. The reality of the situation hit me hard. Macy had stolen a police officer's card. This was no longer just a family issue. It was a legal one. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, worry. What would happen to Macy now? This was a mess that she had created, and now we were all caught in it. The situation escalated quickly. After Macy hung up the phone, Dad immediately got in touch with his colleagues at the station to report the stolen card. He was calm and professional, but I could tell he was upset. I never thought I'd be applying for my daughter's sister-in-law, he said, shaking his head. But we need to follow procedure. Braxton and I sat in the living room feeling a mix of anxiety and disbelief. It wasn't long before we heard a knock on the door. It was two police officers. Dad's colleagues had come to take a statement. As they were wrapping up, another call came in. It was Bonnie, Braxton's mom, her voice frantic. Kelsey, what's this I hear about Macy and a stolen card? Tell me it's not true. Braxton took the phone, his voice strained. Mom, it's true. Macy took father-in-law's bank card and used it. The police are involved now. Bonnie sounded on the verge of tears. But she's family. Can't he just let it go? She made a mistake. Braxton replied firmly. Mom, it's out of our hands. Father-in-law's a police officer. This is serious. The situation reached its peak later that evening at the police station. Braxton, Bonnie, Jerry, Dad, and I were all there. Macy was in one of the interview rooms looking small and scared. Jerry was the first to break the silence. I can't believe she would do something like this. We've tried to raise her right. Bonnie was defensive. She's just a child. She didn't mean any harm. Dad spoke up, his tone even but firm. Stealing is serious, especially from a law enforcement officer. It's not just a family matter anymore. We were waiting when Macy came out, accompanied by an officer. Her usual bravado was gone. She looked at us, her eyes welling up with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't think it would be a big deal. Dad stepped forward. Macy, you need to understand the gravity of what you've done. This isn't just a simple mistake. Bonnie rushed to Macy, hugging her. It's okay, baby. We'll sort this out. But Jerry had enough. No, Bonnie. This is where we draw the line. She needs to learn. The officer cleared his throat. We can proceed with charges, or if the cardholder wishes, he can decide not to press charges this time. Dad looked at me and Braxton, then at Macy. I won't press charges, but this is your last chance, Macy. Any more trouble, and it's out of my hands. Macy nodded, sniffling. I promise, no more trouble. The incident with the stolen card wasn't just a passing storm in our lives. It left lasting changes in its wake. After Dad discovered the amount Macy had spent with his card, Jerry, Braxton's father, had no choice but to cover the expenses. It was a hefty sum, and the tension it caused within the family was palpable. We gathered at Jerry and Bonnie's house for what was supposed to be a regular family dinner, but the atmosphere was anything but normal. Jerry sat at the head of the table, his expression stern and resolute. Macy, I've paid back the money you took from Kelsey's father, Jerry began, his voice heavy with disappointment. But I want you to understand, this doesn't end here. You need to find a job and pay me back every penny. Macy, who had been quiet until then, suddenly erupted. Pay you back? That's ridiculous. I can't believe you're doing this to me. Jerry was unyielding. It's time you learn to take responsibility for your actions. I'm not giving you any more money. The declaration seemed to push Macy over the edge. She stood up, knocking her chair back. Fine, if that's how you want it, I'm leaving. I don't need any of you. The room fell silent as Macy stormed out. Bonnie, tears streaming down her face, stood up to follow her daughter. "How could you, Jerry? She's our daughter." Jerry's response was firm yet tinged with sadness. "She needs to learn, Bonnie. We can't keep shielding her from the consequences of her actions." With a final sob, Bonnie left the room, leaving a heavy silence behind. In the months that followed, the family dynamic shifted dramatically. Bonnie and Macy moved out, renting a small apartment. Jerry, though heartbroken, stood by his decision, believing it was for the best. Braxton and I watched from the sidelines, hoping that Macy would come to her senses. However, occasional glances at her social media profiles told a different story. Pictures of nights out, new clothes, and the same carefree attitude. It seemed Macy hadn't learned much from the ordeal. As for Braxton and me, the whole experience brought us closer. We learned the importance of setting boundaries and the value of standing up for what's right, even when it's tough. Our home became our sanctuary once again, a place of peace and respect. Looking back, I realized that every family faces its trials. Ours were complicated, filled with tough love and difficult decisions. But through it all, we learned valuable lessons about responsibility, respect, and the sometimes painful process of growing up. "I'm moving in with my parents, Vivian. If you're against it, then let's get a divorce," he declared, his voice devoid of emotion. "What are you talking about, Daniel?" I stammered, my mind racing. The audacity of his words was like a slap across my face. "It's simple," he continued, his eyes cold and calculating. "We'll use your $3 million inheritance to build a house there. That's the plan." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The inheritance, my mother's final gift to me, now a tool in Daniel's scheme. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "Oh, I'm dead serious, Vivian. It's time to make some changes," he replied, his tone sharp. I remembered our life together, the days of laughter, love, the birth of our children. How did we end up here? I was 39, a mother of 2, living what I thought was a normal life with a man I once loved. But now, Daniel stood before me, a stranger. He was always a bit controlling, but I never imagined this. "You have no right to decide how my inheritance is used," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Daniel smirked. "As your husband, I think I do. It's either my way or the highway, Vivian. Decide." I stared at him, trying to find a trace of the man I married, but all I saw was a greedy stranger eyeing my inheritance like a vulture. I realized then, standing in the shadow of the man I no longer recognized, that my marriage was a lie. "Fine," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my heart. "If that's how you want it, we're done. Of course, but don't expect to touch a dime of my money." Daniel's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of shock. He hadn't expected this. He turned on his heel and left, slamming the door behind him. I stood there alone, my heart pounding in my ears. The battle lines were drawn. This was no longer just about money. It was about my dignity, my freedom. As the silence enveloped me, I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let Daniel destroy me. I would fight back. The next morning, the house felt eerily silent as I prepared breakfast. My mind replayed the previous night's confrontation with Daniel. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could he be so callous? The money was a part of my mother's legacy, not some lottery windfall for Daniel to squander. Our children, Meryl and Wyatt, noticed the tension but remained quiet. They were too young to understand the complexity of adult conflicts, yet they sensed something was amiss. I forced a smile for their sake. After dropping them off at school, I drove to my mother's house, now empty and echoing with memories. Sitting in her living room, I recalled the numerous times Daniel's parents had made insensitive remarks about our lifestyle, our choices, even our children. They had always favored traditional gender roles, and Daniel unfortunately seemed to have inherited their archaic views. "I don't understand why you're still working," Daniel's mother once sneered. "A woman's place is at home with her children." Daniel never stood up for me. He always brushed off their comments, telling me to ignore them. But how could I? Their words were like needles, pricking away at my self-esteem. Now, with my mother gone and my marriage crumbling, I felt a surge of resentment towards Daniel. He had never truly been my partner. He had left me to fend for myself against his parents' criticisms, never once taking my side. I remembered the time when I was pregnant with Meryl and how Daniel's parents had openly expressed their hope for a grandson. When Meryl was born, their disappointment was palpable. "Next time, make sure it's a boy," they had said, barely concealing their dissatisfaction. It was painful seeing my daughter subjected to such blatant favoritism. And now, Daniel wanted to use my inheritance to move closer to them, to immerse ourselves in their toxic environment. The thought made my blood boil. I wouldn't let that happen. As I sat there surrounded by the remnants of my mother's life, a plan began to form in my mind. I would not be bullied into submission. I would fight back, not just for myself, but for my children too. Daniel had shown his true colors, and it was time for him to face the consequences. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for war. I spent the next few days gathering documents and preparing for the legal battle ahead. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Miss Martin, assured me that we had a strong case. "Don't worry, Vivian. We'll make sure that inheritance stays where it rightfully belongs," she said with a confident smile. One evening, as I was sorting through some of my mother's belongings, I stumbled upon an old, dusty envelope tucked away in a drawer. Inside, I found a set of documents, stock certificates and property deeds. My hands trembled as I realized the extent of my mother's secret savings. Including the stock's current value and the property, it amounted to a staggering $3 million. I couldn't believe it. My mother, who had lived so modestly, had been sitting on a small fortune. She had always been prudent with money, but I never imagined she had accumulated so much. A note accompanied the documents, written in my mother's neat handwriting. "Vivian, I saved this for a rainy day. I hope it gives you and the kids a better life. Use it wisely." Tears welled up in my eyes. My mother's foresight and love felt like a warm embrace, even from beyond the grave. The next day, I decided to confront Daniel. He needed to know that his plan to squander my inheritance was doomed to fail. I found him in the living room, lazily flipping through a magazine. "Daniel, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He looked up, a hint of annoyance in his eyes. "What is it now, Vivian?" "I found something of my mother's," I started, holding up the envelope. "Turns out she left me stocks and properties worth $3 million. Daniel's eyes widened, a mix of shock and greed flashing across his face. "$3 million? That's great news." His reaction disgusted me. "Don't get any ideas, Daniel. This money is mine and the kids. You won't see a cent of it." His expression turned dark. "You can't keep it all to yourself, Vivian. We're married. What's yours is mine." I felt a surge of anger. "You've shown your true colors, Daniel. You don't care about me or the kids. All you see is dollar signs." Daniel stood up, his face red with anger. "You're being selfish, Vivian. I'm thinking about our future, about our family." "What family, Daniel? The one you're ready to abandon for your own selfish needs?" I shot back. He took a step towards me, his fists clenched. "You'll regret this, Vivian. I'll make sure of it." I stood my ground, unwavering. "Bring it on, Daniel. I'm not afraid of you anymore." He stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and bitter battle, but I was ready. For my children, for my mother's legacy, and for myself. The following week was a whirlwind of legal consultations and tense silences at home. Daniel's attitude had shifted from shock to a cold, calculated aggression. He was like a caged animal, desperate and dangerous. One evening, as the kids were asleep, Daniel cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes were wild, his posture aggressive. "You think you're clever, Vivian, hiding that money from me?" I leaned against the counter, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "It's not about being clever, Daniel. It's about what's right. That money is for me and the kids, not for your deluded fantasies." He slammed his fist on the countertop, making me jump. "I am your husband. I have rights to that money. You're just a—" His words were like venom, but I cut him off. "A what, Daniel? A woman who won't bow down to your greed and bullying?" His face contorted in anger. "You'll regret this, Vivian. I'll make sure you don't get a dime of that money." I could feel the danger in his words, but I refused to show fear. "Is that a threat, Daniel?" He leaned in, his breath foul. "It's a promise." I pushed past him, my body shaking with adrenaline. "We'll see about that. The court will decide." As I walked away, his voice followed me, filled with malice. "You're going to be left with nothing, Vivian. Nothing." The next day, I received a call from my lawyer. Vivian, Daniel has filed for divorce. He's claiming half of your inheritance. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way. Miss Martin's voice was firm. We have a strong case, Vivian. Don't worry. We'll make sure justice is served. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about my children sleeping peacefully in their rooms. I was doing this for them, for their future. Daniel had become a stranger to me, a man consumed by greed and spite. But I was no longer the woman he thought he could control and intimidate. I closed my eyes, envisioning the courtroom, the judge, the final verdict. I would stand tall, fight hard, and win, not just for the money, but for my dignity, for my children's future, and for the quiet strength my mother had always shown. This was my battle, and I was ready for it. The legal battle that ensued was grueling. Daniel's strategy was clear: to paint me as an uncooperative wife hoarding the family's resources. But his arguments were flimsy, rooted more in desperation than in law. One afternoon we faced each other in mediation, a last attempt to settle before the court hearing. Daniel sat across from me, his lawyer by his side. His gaze was cold, his demeanor smug. Let's be reasonable, Vivian, his lawyer began. Daniel is entitled to a portion of this inheritance. It's only fair. I glanced at Miss Martin, my resolve steel. Fair? Daniel has made no contribution to this inheritance. It is solely from my late mother, intended for me and my children. Daniel leaned forward, his voice dripping with scorn. Oh, come on, Vivian. You're just being spiteful. Don't you think the kids would want their father to have a share? I felt a surge of anger. This isn't about spite, Daniel. It's about what's just. You've never cared about what the kids want. This is about your greed. His lawyer tried to interject, but Daniel raised his hand, signaling him to stop. You think you can just take everything, don't you, Vivian? Play the grieving daughter and the victimized wife? I met his gaze squarely. This isn't a game, Daniel. You're the one trying to take what isn't yours. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, interjected. Let's try to remain civil. This is about finding a resolution. Daniel cut her off, his voice rising. A resolution? She's the one being unreasonable. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. I spoke calmly, yet firmly. I am being perfectly reasonable. I'm protecting what my mother left for her grandchildren. Daniel's claims are baseless. The mediator called for a break, sensing the futility of the discussion. As we stood up, Daniel leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear. You'll pay for this, Vivian. I'll make sure of it. I walked out of the room, my heart racing but my spirit unbroken. Daniel's threats were empty, his case weak. I knew the law was on my side, and I was determined to see this through to the end. In the following weeks, I pored over legal documents, met with Miss Martin, and prepared for the court hearing. The kids stayed with my sister, shielded from the worst of the storm. I missed them terribly, but I knew this fight was for their future as much as it was mine. The day of the hearing arrived. I stood in the courtroom ready to face Daniel and whatever lies he planned to spin. This was it, the moment of truth, and I was ready to fight with everything I had. The courtroom was a battleground where words were wielded like swords. Daniel's lawyer painted a picture of a husband wronged, deprived of his rightful share. But under Miss Martin's skilled questioning, his arguments crumbled like a house of cards. During a recess, Daniel cornered me in the hallway, his face twisted in fury. You're ruining everything, Vivian. You think you're going to walk away with all that money? I stood my ground despite the fear gnawing at me. It's not your money, Daniel. It never was. He stepped closer, his voice a venomous whisper. I'll drag this out as long as it takes. I'll bleed you dry in legal fees. I met his gaze, my voice unwavering. Do what you must. I won't let you bully me into submission. As we returned to the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. Daniel's threats were hollow, his bravado a mask for his desperation. The final verdict was a vindication. The judge ruled in my favor, recognizing the inheritance as my sole property. Daniel's face as the judgment was delivered was a picture of defeat. But the victory was bittersweet. I had won the legal battle, but at what cost? My marriage was over, the family I had known shattered. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's life unraveled. His reputation built on lies and intimidation crumbled. The community saw him for what he was, a greedy man who had tried to take advantage of his wife's inheritance. Rumors reached me about his struggles. He had lost his job, his friends, and his standing in the community. It was a steep fall from grace, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of poetic justice. One evening I received a call from a mutual acquaintance. "Vivian, have you heard about Daniel?" I hesitated. "No, what about him?" "He's moving out of town, lost his job, his house. He's pretty much broke." I felt a pang of not quite satisfaction, but something close. Daniel had reaped what he had sown. He had tried to destroy me, but in the end he had destroyed himself. I hung up the phone and looked at the picture of my children on the mantel. This fight had been for them, for their future and security. As I tucked them into bed that night, I felt a sense of peace. The battle was over, and we had emerged stronger. We were free from Daniel's shadow, ready to start a new chapter. Our lives would be different, but we would be okay. We were together, and that was all that mattered. In the months that followed the court ruling, life settled into a new rhythm. The victory in court had given me a sense of closure, but it was the start of a new journey, one of healing and rebuilding. I decided to sell the house, the scene of so many bitter memories. As I packed up each item I sorted through was a step away from my past with Daniel. I was determined to create a better future for Meryl and Wyatt. One day, while going through some old boxes in the attic, I found a picture of Daniel and me in happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to grieve for the life I thought I had, the love I thought was real. But as I looked at his smiling face in the photo, I realized that the man I had married no longer existed. He had shown his true colors, and they were dark and ugly. I tossed the photo into the trash bin, a symbolic gesture of letting go. Moving to a new town brought a fresh start. I found a cozy home in a friendly neighborhood. The kids enrolled in a new school and soon made friends. As for me, I began to focus more on my writing, finding solace in the worlds I created with my words. One evening, as I was tucking Meryl into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Mom, do you miss Dad?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes I miss who I thought your dad was, but we're better off now. We're a strong team, just the three of us." She nodded, a wise look in her young eyes. "I like it here, Mom. I like our new home." Her words filled me with warmth. We had indeed come a long way. As I lay in bed that night, I reflected on the journey. Daniel's downfall was his own doing. His greed and malice had backfired, leaving him with nothing. While I harbored no joy in his misfortunes, there was a sense of justice in how things had turned out. The kids and I had a long road ahead, but we were on the path to healing. The inheritance, now securely invested, would provide for their education and our future. I closed my eyes thinking of my mother. Her strength and foresight had saved us. In her wisdom, she had given me the means to protect myself and my children. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and in its wake it had left clarity and hope. We had weathered the worst, and now a new day was dawning. Hi, I'm Gemma. I work at Steve's, a diner that's more about grease than glamour. Today started like any other, with me tying my apron a bit tighter and hoping for decent tips. The bell above the door jingled mid-morning, and then walked this guy, who looked like he had taken a wrong turn on his way to some high-end office, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my rent. He took a seat at the counter. "You lost or something?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron as I approached him. He flashed a quick smile. "Sort of. Heard you serve the best breakfast in town and I'm starving. Got anything that can fix that?" "Well, if it's food you want, you're in the right place," I said, handing him a menu. "Our pancakes could do the job, or are you one of those egg white omelet kind of guys?" "I'll take the pancakes and add some bacon," he said. "Lots of it. Coming right up," I said, scribbling down his order. As I passed the order to the cook, I couldn't help but steal another glance his way. He seemed out of place, yet oddly comfortable sitting among our regulars who didn't bother looking up from their mugs. When his food was ready, I slid the plate in front of him and watched as he dug in like it was his first meal in days. "Not bad, huh?" I remarked. He looked up, a bit of syrup on the side of his mouth. "Not bad at all. This might just become my new favorite spot." Glad to hear it, I replied. We could use a few more suits around here to balance out the trucker caps. He laughed, and we got to talking. His name was Martin, and he worked in finance, whatever that meant in detail. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. He asked about me, and I kept it simple. Just keeping things right running around here, I said. So, Gemma, what's a girl like you doing in a place like this? He asked with a grin that told me he wasn't just talking about the diner. I raised an eyebrow, trying to make a living in this crazy world. What's a guy like you doing, walking into diners that look like they could be knocked over by a stiff breeze? I like to keep things interesting, Martin replied, his eyes twinkling a bit. And I guess today that meant finding the best pancakes in town. We continued chatting as he ate. He didn't put on airs or try to impress me with his obviously well-off life. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, which was more than I could say for most. As he was about to leave, he turned back to me. So, Gemma, can I come back tomorrow? Maybe try the omelet this time? He asked. I smiled, wiping down the counter. Sure thing, Martin. We're here all day, every day. Just don't wear out your welcome too fast. He laughed, making a casual light sound. I'll try not to. See you tomorrow, Gemma. And just like that, he walked out, leaving a nice tip and a curious warmth in his wake. Little did I know, this suit would change my life, not just my tip jar. True to his word, Martin was back the next day and the day after that. It wasn't long before he was part of the furniture at Steve's, his fancy suits a stark contrast against the backdrop of worn-out booths and faded wallpaper. Each morning, he'd take his usual spot at the counter, and I'd serve him his breakfast with a side of banter. Gemma, you ever think about escaping this joint? He'd ask, sipping his coffee as he eyed the usual morning rush. Escape and miss all this? I'd gesture around at the chaos of the morning rush. Where else would I get the pleasure of your company? He'd laugh, that rich, warm sound filling up the space between us. Fair point. But seriously, you could do anything. Ever thought about what else is out there? I don't know, I confessed, refilling his cup. I guess I'm just comfortable, you know? Sure, it's not glamorous, but it's familiar. It's home. Our banter became the highlight of my mornings, but it wasn't just jokes and light talk. Sometimes when the diner was quiet and the world outside hadn't yet ramped up to full speed, Martin would share bits and pieces of his life outside of those suits. And in those moments, I felt a connection that went beyond server and customer. You know, my family's not too keen on where I spend my mornings, he confessed one quieter day. They can't understand why I'd prefer Steve's pancakes over some 5-star breakfast menu. And what do you tell them? I asked, genuinely curious about his reply. I tell them they don't know what they're missing, he said with a smirk. That, and I've got a good reason to stick around. The implication hung in the air, unsaid but understood. I'd be lying if I said it didn't give me butterflies. But life has a way of reminding you not to get too carried away. So I brushed off the fluttering in my stomach and kept things light. Keep talking like that and I might start charging you extra for the charm, I warned him with a mock stern look. Charge away, he laughed. It'd be worth every penny. His visits became the parts of my day I looked forward to the most. It wasn't just that he was easy on the eyes or that his tips were more than generous. It was the way he looked at me, like I was someone worth seeing, like I was more than just a waitress in a tired diner. But as easy as it was to fall into a routine of smiles and subtle flirtations, I knew life wasn't a fairy tale. Guys like Martin didn't end up with girls like me, or so I thought, until the day he proved me wrong. Gemma, what do you say we take this conversation somewhere else tonight? Dinner, my treat? Somewhere without greasy spoons and coffee stains. I paused, the offer hanging between us. It was one thing to flirt across a diner counter, quite another to step out into the real world together. But looking into his earnest eyes, I decided maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. The leap dinner outside of Steve's turned into more dinners and then into movies, walks, and whole weekends together. Martin and we just clicked like I never thought possible with anyone, let alone someone like him. It was a chilly evening in November when everything changed again. We were at this little overlook in the city, one of those spots tourists don't know about but locals treasure, watching the lights blink on across the skyline. Gemma, you know you mean the world to me, right? Martin started, his breath misting in the cold air. I chuckled, tucking my hands into the pockets of my coat. I'd hope so by now, considering how much of your wardrobe has taken over my apartment. He laughed, that sound I'd come to love, but then he turned serious, taking my hands in his. I'm not just talking about leaving a few shirts around. I mean, I want us to start thinking about a future together. He pulled a small box from his coat pocket, flipping it open to reveal a ring that caught the city lights just right. Will you marry me, Gemma? Joy, pure and simple, rushed through me. Yes! I almost shouted it, then laughed at my own eagerness. Yes, I'll marry you. We kissed there under the starry sky, the city sprawling out below us. It felt like a scene from a movie, only it was real, and it was ours. But reality has a way of creeping in, doesn't it? On the way back to my place, I had to voice the nagging concern that had been eating at me since he slipped the ring on my finger. Martin, you know I'm not exactly what your family might have pictured for you, right? I mean, my most expensive dress is from the discount rack at Macy's. He squeezed my hand, his smile reassuring. I love you for who you are, Gemma, not for what you wear or where you come from. My family's cool. They'll see what I see. The first hint that things might not go as smoothly as Martin believed came a few weeks later when we went to dinner at his parents' house. His dad, Marcellus, was a big, hearty man who greeted me with a loud welcome and a bear hug that lifted me off my feet. His grandmother, a sharp lady with a surprisingly warm smile, patted my hand and told me to call her Mrs. Grant. But Flora, Martin's mom, she was another story. She looked at me like that, like she was evaluating every part of me. So Gemma, what do your parents do? She pressed, her eyes narrowing just a bit. I knew where this was heading, but I wasn't about to lie. My dad's a mechanic and my mom's a cashier at the grocery store. We're not fancy, but we get by. Every time I walked into Martin's family home, it felt like stepping into a different world, one where every glance and word was weighed and measured. His dad and his grandmother always treated me with kindness, which made what I had to endure from Flora even harder to swallow. Dinner was a fancy affair, as always. Marcellus and Mrs. Grant were warm and welcoming, asking me about my day with genuine interest. But Flora had a different agenda. As we settled around the dining table loaded with more types of forks than I knew what to do with, she started her usual interrogation. So, Gemma, was food scarce in your house as a child? Flora asked, her voice dripping with a fake concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. We always had enough, Mrs. Burns, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. My parents made sure of it. And the cutlery, she continued, eyeing me like I was some specimen under a microscope. Do you find our silverware confusing? I glanced down at the array of shining metal by my plate and then met her gaze squarely. No, ma'am, a fork's a fork. It's all about getting the food to your mouth, right? There was a stifled chuckle from Marcellus, quickly silenced with a sharp look from Flora. The conversation took a slight turn when I mentioned my job. I'm managing a cafe right now, I told them, and I help out as a waitress too. My dad's been ill, and the extra shifts help cover the medical bills. Mrs. Grant's eyes softened. That's very commendable, Gemma. It's important to support family. You're doing a wonderful job. But Flora quickly stripped away the warmth with her frosty smile. Indeed, how resourceful of you, she said, her tone suggesting that resourceful was somehow a step down from respectable. As dinner progressed, the air grew tenser. Once we moved to the living room for coffee, Flora cornered me while Martin was out of the room. Gemma, you do understand that marrying into our family isn't just a personal commitment, but a social one too, she began, her voice low and pointed. There are certain standards one must uphold. I faced her with as much calm as I could muster. I know I come from a different background, Mrs. Burns, but I love your son and I'm not here to cause trouble or embarrass anyone. And your family, she prodded, clearly not ready to let it go. Will they be comfortable in settings like this or will they stick out? That's enough, Flora, came Mrs. Grant's sharp voice behind us. Martin's grandmother had stepped into the room, her presence commanding. Gemma has shown nothing but grace under your scrutiny. It's more than I can say for others. Flora's face tightened, but she held her tongue in front of her mother-in-law. Thank you, Mrs. Grant, I said, feeling a surge of gratitude for the elderly woman's intervention. Mrs. Grant nodded, then turned her keen eyes on me. You're a strong young woman, Gemma. It's clear you care deeply for our Martin. That's what truly matters. As the wedding day drew closer, the mix of excitement and nerves swirled around me like a whirlwind. Martin and I were up to our elbows in planning details, from choosing flowers to finalizing the guest list. We wanted something small and intimate, but even small details felt monumental. One afternoon, buried in brochures and fabric samples, my phone rang. It was Sienna, my maid of honor, checking in. "Hey girl, how's the wedding factory today?" Sienna's voice was like a lifeline in the sea of decisions. "You mean the chaos factory? We're drowning over here. Can't decide between roses or lilies, and don't even get me started on the tablecloths," I groaned, scanning a catalog. "Go with roses, they're timeless, Gemma. But tell me, have you nailed down your dress yet?" Sienna knew how to keep me on track. "Oh yeah, I picked it up last week. It's simple but beautiful, nothing over the top," I responded, a small smile breaking through the stress. "You're going to look stunning, Gemma. Remember, it's you he's marrying, not the dress," she reassured me warmly. Martin, overhearing the conversation, added his 2 cents. "Absolutely, Gemma. You'll be the most beautiful bride." I wanted everything to be perfect, not just for us, but to prove a point to some skeptics, especially Martin's mom, Flora. Speaking of Flora, her digs had been constant. Just last week, she dropped a comment that had me seeing red. "Gemma, are you designing your dress yourself, or are you picking one off some clearance rack?" Her words, sharp and unwelcome, lingered in my mind. "Actually, Flora, I found a wonderful dress at a boutique. It's perfect for me," I had replied, keeping my tone neutral despite wanting to snap back. "And the honeymoon, let me guess, a charming little getaway to your family's village?" she had said, a smirk playing on her lips. "No, we're thinking of a road trip, just the 2 of us, exploring some places we've always wanted to see," I had countered, my voice steady but my hands clenching into fists out of sight. Her ability to weave condescension into every question was like an art form, and each jab made me more determined to have the beautiful day we envisioned. Her approval be damned. The final days leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity. I stayed over at Sienna's the night before, restless and anxious, running through every detail in my head. "Can't sleep," Sienna murmured in the dark, her voice sleepy but concerned. "Not a wink, just going over everything in my mind, worrying about what Flora might pull tomorrow," I confessed, my eyes staring at the ceiling. Sienna propped herself up, her silhouette shadowed in the moonlight. "Listen, Gemma, whatever happens, at the end of the day, you're marrying Martin. That's all that matters. Forget the centerpieces, forget the snide remarks, especially from Flora. You're right, it's about us, not the show," I sighed, feeling a bit of weight lift. The wedding day finally arrived, filled with sunshine and smiles, but a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling, especially when I caught Flora's expectant look as I walked down the aisle. Everything about her gaze whispered that she was waiting, maybe even hoping, for something to go wrong. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Martin and I exchanged vows, promising to stick by each other through thick and thin, and for a moment, I believed we could overcome anything. But that optimism shattered at the reception. After the initial toasts where Martin's dad and Mrs. Grant spoke warmly about unity and love, Flora stood up to make her speech. There was a gleam in her eye that didn't sit right with me. My heart sank as she took the microphone, her voice ringing out a little too cheerful, a little too loud. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone jovial as if she were about to tell a funny story. "Today we welcome Gemma into our family. Gemma, with her humble origins, which she has so often shared with us. From her stories we've learned so much about making do with less." The room grew uncomfortably silent, my face heated up, and I felt Martin stiffen beside me. Flora continued, oblivious or indifferent to the shifting atmosphere. "Indeed, Gemma has shown us all how from very little one can reach heights they never dreamed of, almost like a fairy tale. It's just marvelous how someone accustomed to so little could adapt so well to the abundance of our family, isn't it? Just a modern Cinderella story, from rags to riches, or should I say from freeloading to feasting at our tables." The guests murmured, some in shock, others in discomfort. Tears pricked at my eyes, humiliation washing over me in waves. Beside me I could feel Martin's rage through the tight grip he had on his chair. My parents, sitting in the front row, looked down, their faces flushed with shame. It was the most excruciating moment of my life, and I felt utterly small and helpless. But before the whispers could grow, Mrs. Grant stood up, her presence commanding silence as she approached Flora. With a firm hand, she took the microphone from her daughter-in-law. "Flora," she started, her voice stern and powerful, echoing through the hall. "It seems you've forgotten where you yourself came from. Let me remind everyone here." She turned to face the confused guests. "Flora wasn't born into luxury. She worked in our household. And yes, she was a servant. She got pregnant by my son and married him to herself. And her ascent into this family began not unlike the tale she mocks." The room was dead silent now, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. Flora's beginnings were as modest as Gemma's, if not more so. And yet here she stands, casting stones from a house of glass. I wonder why the scorn? Why the disdain for someone's humble start? Gemma has shown nothing but grace and strength, qualities we should all aspire to. Flora's face turned a deep red, her earlier confidence crumbling into embarrassment. Without a word, she left the room, her exit as dramatic as her speech. The day after the wedding, instead of relaxing or reminiscing about the event, Martin and I were summoned to Mrs. Grant's grand home. There was a palpable tension as we walked through the doors, knowing that something significant was about to unfold. Mrs. Grant gathered the entire family in her large sitting room, where portraits of ancestors looked down on us with stern, silent judgment. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and, for some, apprehension. As we took our seats, I noticed Flora's face was pale, her usual poised demeanor replaced with nervous twitches. Mrs. Grant didn't waste any time. She stood at the head of the room, her presence commanding as she addressed everyone. "I've called you all here today to discuss matters that cannot be ignored any longer," she began, her voice stern. "Yesterday's events at the wedding were disgraceful, and not the first instance of Flora's inappropriate behavior." She pulled out a sheet of paper, which appeared to be a list, and continued. "Here I have a detailed record of expenses that Flora has accrued over the last month alone. The extravagance and carelessness are astonishing." The room was silent, all eyes on the matriarch. Marcellus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor. Mrs. Grant looked directly at Flora. "As the head of this family and the steward of our family fortune, I can no longer justify the continued financial support that leads to such flagrant misuse. Flora, you are cut off from your maintenance funds. If you wish to maintain your lifestyle, you will need to find employment." Flora gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "Mother, you can't be serious. I've always managed my allowances as I saw fit." "It's no longer just about how you manage your money, Flora," Mrs. Grant retorted sharply, turning to her son. "Marcellus, do you have anything to add?" Marcellus, who had been silent up until now, looked up, his expression hard. "I agree with Mother. This has gone too far, Flora. And if things don't change, if you continue this way, I can't see this marriage continuing." Flora's face crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Marcellus, please, you can't mean that. You wouldn't." "I can and I will if necessary," Marcellus replied, his voice steady but sad. "It's time to take responsibility, Flora." After all the chaos of the wedding and its fallout, Martin and I finally escaped on our honeymoon. Those weeks away were like a deep breath after a sprint. We roamed cities and beaches, trying to put distance between us and the drama back home. But like all good things, our honeymoon came to an end, and reality was waiting for us when we returned. Pulling into our driveway, Martin looked over at me, a hesitant look on his face. "I got a call from Dad while you were napping on the plane," he started, turning off the car but not moving to get out. "He and Mom, well, they're getting a divorce. It's really happening this time." "I'm sorry, babe. I know how tough this must be on you," I said, reaching out, squeezing his hand. "It's been a long time coming. Can't say I didn't see it after what happened," he sighed tiredly. "I just wish—" His voice trailed off, the words hanging between us. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the engine cooling down filling the space. "And Mom?" I finally asked, not sure if I wanted to hear the answer. "She's moved out. Got herself a small place downtown. She's looking for a job now," Martin replied, his tone flat. The strained relationship with his mother was taking its toll on him. The next day, life tried to return to some semblance of normal. We went back to work, dealing with the everyday, while Martin dealt with his family's upheaval. The evenings were our refuge, where we could shut the door on the world's demands. As days turned into weeks, updates from Martin's dad became more sporadic. The divorce was messy, dragging emotions and old resentments into the light. Martin stood by his dad, supporting him, while I did my best to support Martin. Flora tried to reach out once, her voice on the phone sounding small and lost. But Martin was firm, his words clear. "Mom, you need to figure out some things on your own. We can talk when you're ready to be honest with yourself and with us." After that call, he was quiet for a long time, staring out the window into the darkening sky. I didn't push him to talk. Instead, I sat beside him, my presence a silent promise of the support I had vowed. Moving forward wasn't just about leaving things behind, but about building something new from the pieces. As we drifted off to sleep, I knew that together we could build something lasting, something true, not in spite of the challenges, but because of them. My name is Bonnie, and if you had told me a year ago that my life would turn into an amazing mix of soap opera and psychological thriller, I would have just laughed it off. Yet here I am, reflecting on a series of events that tested my marriage, my patience, and my very understanding of family. It started innocently enough. I met Christopher in an unlikely place, an evening art class we both attended to unwind from our demanding jobs. He was a quiet, introspective man, his brushstrokes revealing more about him than his words ever did. We bonded over our shared love for impressionist paintings, finding solace in the chaotic swirls of color that somehow made more sense than the world around us. Our romance was a slow burn, kindled by shared glances and the gentle graze of hands as we reached for the same paint tube. It wasn't just love that we found in each other. It was a deep understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken pains we carried. Christopher's past, particularly, was a tapestry of shadow and light. His father had passed away when he was just a boy, leaving him in the care of his mother, who quickly married. Lilani, his mother, was a complex character in his life. She was a woman who had swiftly filled the void left by his father with another man, a man who turned out to be the antithesis of what a father figure should be. Christopher seldom spoke of those days. Our story wasn't one of dramatic encounters or love at first sight. It was instead a quiet recognition, like finding a piece of a long-lost puzzle that fits perfectly. Christopher and I were both passionate about the arts, finding in our weekly art classes a refuge from the demands of our professional lives. He was an engineer by day, his mind a fascinating blend of technical precision and creative flair. I worked in marketing, a field that demanded creativity but often felt stifling in its corporate constraints. Our initial conversations were tentative, revolving around the artworks we admired. But as weeks turned into months, our discussions deepened, revealing layers of our personalities and lives. I learned about Christopher's love for classical music, his fingers often mimicking the motions of a pianist when a particularly moving piece played in his head. He discovered my passion for poetry, the way words could dance and weave tales in the air between us. Falling in love with Christopher was like watching a sunrise, gradual yet awe-inspiring. He had a way of seeing beauty in the mundane, a perspective that challenged and intrigued me. We shared our first kiss under the ember glow of a street lamp, the world around us fading into a blur of insignificance. It was a kiss that spoke of promises, of shared dreams, and a future painted in vibrant hues. As our relationship blossomed, so did my understanding of Christopher's past. He spoke of his father with a reverent sadness, a man who loved him unconditionally and left too soon. The void his father left was vast, and what filled it was a relationship marred by neglect and emotional abuse at the hands of his stepfather. Through his stories, I saw the resilience in Christopher, the strength it took to emerge from the shadows of his past. But in those shadows lurked a figure I was yet to fully comprehend, Leilani, his mother, a woman who, in choosing to protect her own heart, left her son to fend for himself against the storms. As our love deepened, so did my understanding of the complexities of Christopher's family life. He spoke of his childhood with a mixture of nostalgia and pain. His father, a kind soul, had been his hero, and his untimely death left a void filled by a man who was his antithesis. This stepfather was not just indifferent but cruel, wielding harsh words and colder silences like weapons. Christopher's refuge in those tumultuous years was his art, a silent witness to his unspoken agony. The most perplexing character in his past was Leilani. After his father's death, she had remarried quickly, seemingly oblivious to the emotional turmoil her son was going through. Christopher's recounting of those days was always tinged with a baffling mix of understanding and hurt. It was as if he couldn't reconcile the mother he wanted with the one he had. She knew, he told me once, his voice barely a whisper, of the coldness and cruelty her new husband showed him, yet she chose to turn a blind eye. Our engagement was a beacon of hope amidst these shadows. Christopher, with his gentle eyes and hesitant smile, proposed on a quiet evening, the same place where we shared our first kiss. It was a beautiful moment, but even as we planned our future, I could sense the unspoken worries that clouded his mind. These worries materialized in the form of Leilani. Christopher had been supporting her financially since his college days, a fact I only learned after our engagement. It seemed Leilani had become increasingly dependent on him, especially after she left her second husband. This dependency wasn't just financial, it was emotional manipulation at its finest. She played on Christopher's guilt and sense of duty, twisting his love into a tool for her own ends. I watched Christopher struggle with this, torn between his duty as a son and his life with me. My heart ached for him, for the choices he felt he had to make and the burdens he shouldered. The true colors of Leilani, Christopher's mother, became evident as our wedding plans unfolded. Her demeanor towards me shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably. It was in the slight curl of her lip when Christopher mentioned my name, in the way her eyes narrowed ever so slightly when she looked at me. Her words were always coated with a veneer of politeness, but the underlying disdain was unmistakable. "Bonnie, dear, make sure you keep my son happy," she'd say, her tone implying a challenge rather than a request. Her manipulation of Christopher was more overt. She wielded her maternal influence, and the narrative she spun was one of sacrifice and suffering, a mother who had for her son now sought his support. Christopher was caught in her web of emotional blackmail. He rationalized her actions, attributing them to her difficult life and the love she supposedly had for him. It was during a quiet evening at home as we discussed our future that the extent of Leilani's manipulation became painfully clear. Christopher confessed that Leilani had persuaded him to finance her lifestyle, using the excuse that she had left her husband for him. It was a masterstroke of emotional manipulation, one that left Christopher feeling responsible for her well-being. I tried to reason with him, to show him the unhealthy situation between him and his mother. "Christopher, she's using you," I pleaded, concern evident in my words. "She's not leaving her husband for you. She's leaving because you can now provide for her." But my words seemed to bounce off the walls he had built around his perception of his mother. He was convinced that it was his duty to care for her, blinded by a sense of obligation that she had meticulously crafted. Leilani's presence became a shadow over our relationship, a constant reminder of the tug-of-war between Christopher's past and our future. The delicate balance we had tried to maintain was shattered one crisp autumn morning, just a week after we had moved into our new home, a quaint house with a small garden that we had lovingly restored. Leilani arrived unannounced and uninvited. She stood at our doorstep, her suitcases a silent testament to her intentions. Her move-in was not a request, but a declaration. She passed me, her eyes scanning the house with a sense of entitlement. "Oh, what a lovely place you have here, Christopher. I knew you'd pick something nice," she remarked, her voice dripping with insincerity. It was clear she saw this not as our home, but as an extension of her domain. The confusion and disappointment on Christopher's face was reflected on my face as well. This was our sanctuary, a place we had built together, now invaded by the very person who had cast a long shadow over Christopher's life. When I confronted him, his response was a mix of resignation and helplessness. "She has nowhere else to go, Bonnie. I can't just leave her out on the street," he said, his voice a mix of guilt and conflict. Over the next few days, Leilani's presence in our home was like a dark cloud looming over every moment. She would make snide remarks under her breath, criticize my cooking, my decorating, even the way I spoke. But her most alarming behavior was towards Christopher. She clung to him, her words and actions an attempt to reassert her role in his life, to remind me that she was his mother first. Foremost, the strain on our marriage became palpable. Arguments became a frequent occurrence as I struggled to make Christopher see the reality of his mother's manipulative tactics. But Leilani had woven her web too well, and Christopher was caught in the middle, torn between the woman he loved and the mother he felt obligated to protect. The turning point came unexpectedly through an encounter with Laura, an interior designer whom Leilani had secretly hired. I met Laura when she arrived one afternoon under the pretense of discussing some minor renovations Leilani had in mind. But as we sat down over coffee, Laura's uneasy glances and hesitant words hinted at a deeper concern. Leilani's requests, they're unusual, Laura began, her voice laced with apprehension. She wants to make changes to your bedroom, and not just any changes, she said. My heart raced as Laura divulged the true nature of Leilani's plan. She intended to install hidden cameras in our bedroom, a gross violation of our privacy. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy that shook me, but the realization of the lengths Leilani would go to control and monitor us. The mother-in-law I had known, despite her flaws, had transformed into something far more sinister in my eyes. I thanked Laura for her honesty and professionalism. Her refusal to be complicit in such a scheme was a small beacon of integrity in the midst of chaos. I knew then that it was time to take action to protect our home, our marriage, and our dignity. After Laura left, I confronted Christopher with the information. His initial reaction was one of disbelief, followed by a crushing realization as the truth sank in. The revelation acted as a catalyst, shattering the illusions he had held about his mother. We decided to take control of the situation, starting with securing our home. Together, we planned a strategic response. We would install our own cameras, not to spy, but to safeguard our home. We needed evidence, undeniable proof of Leilani's transgressions. It was a difficult decision born out of necessity, a countermeasure against the ever-encroaching threat to our privacy and peace. The days following the installation of our own cameras were tense, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface of our daily lives. We were vigilant, monitoring the footage discreetly, waiting for something, anything, that could help us understand Leilani's true intentions. The revelation, when it came, was both shocking and validating. Cameras captured Leilani's secret meetings with a man I had only heard of in conversation. Painful recounts, Christopher's abusive stepfather. Seeing him in our home, in the sanctuary we had built, felt like a desecration. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any of Leilani's previous actions. Confrontation was inevitable. Christopher and I gathered our resolve, steeling ourselves for the storm that was about to break. With the evidence at hand, we faced Leilani in what would become the most harrowing encounter of our lives. The moment she entered the room, I could see the shift in her demeanor. There was a nervous edge to her usual composure, a crack in the facade she had so carefully maintained. "Mom, why is he here? Why did you bring him into our home?" Christopher started, his voice barely containing the tempest of emotions brewing within. Leilani's response was a masterclass in deflection and denial. "I don't know what you're talking about, Christopher. You're being ridiculous." But her words faltered as we presented the irrefutable evidence. The footage of her with the man who had made Christopher's childhood a living nightmare. The ensuing exchange was a blur of accusations, denials, and revelations. Leilani's mask finally slipped, revealing the manipulative, self-serving nature that had lurked beneath her maternal guise. She tried to justify her actions, to spin a narrative where she was the misunderstood victim. But the truth was laid bare for all to see. It was in that moment that Christopher found his voice, a voice that had been suppressed by years of guilt and manipulation. "Enough, Mom. I can't do this anymore. You need to leave." His words were a final, resolute closing of a chapter that had tormented him for too long. The aftermath was a mixture of relief and sorrow. We watched as Leilani packed her belongings, her pleas and tears a stark contrast to the woman who had so confidently walked into our lives. But there was no going back. The bridge had been burned, and the only way forward was without her. In the days that followed, Christopher and I took steps to legally protect ourselves. We reported the stepfather for violating the restraining order, ensuring he could no longer pose a threat to us. We changed the locks, severing the physical and symbolic access Leilani had to our home. But the real healing began with therapy. Christopher, grappling with the resurgence of old traumas, sought professional help, delving into the deep-seated issues that Leilani's actions had brought to the surface. Together, we attended couples counseling, learning to navigate the complex emotions and dynamics that had arisen from this ordeal. Through it all, our love remained a constant, a beacon guiding us through the turmoil. We learned to communicate more openly, to support each other unconditionally, and to build a future free from the shadows of the past. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, as life settled into a new rhythm, I often found myself reflecting on the journey Christopher and I had traversed. The ordeal that has befallen us has subjected us to hardships that we could not have imagined, challenging the very foundations of our marriage. But in that crucible of conflict, we emerged stronger, our bond forged anew in the fires of adversity. Christopher's journey through therapy was transformative. He confronted the ghosts of his past with a bravery that filled me with awe. He learned to untangle the knots of guilt and obligation that Leilani had so skillfully tied around his heart, and in doing so, he found a new sense of freedom, a liberation from the chains of his troubled past. As for me, I discovered a resilience I didn't know I possessed. Standing by Christopher, supporting him through his darkest hours, I realized the depth of my commitment to our life together. Our love, once tested by the tempest, now stood as a testament to our shared strength and dedication. We rebuilt our lives piece by piece in the quiet sanctuary of our home. The paintings that adorned our walls, once mere decorations, now held deeper meanings, symbols of our journey, our struggles, and our triumphs. Leilani's fate remained a distant concern, a chapter closed in the book of our lives. We heard rumors of her moving to another town, grappling with the consequences of her actions, but our focus remained firmly on our future, on the life we were building together. Looking back, I realized that every challenge we faced was a stepping stone to a stronger, more profound love. Our story, though marked by trials, was ultimately one of triumph. A triumph of love over adversity, of truth over manipulation, and of hope over despair.